Your mind does not go blank because you have nothing to say. It goes blank because you are trying too hard to say the right thing. Great conversationalists do something completely different. They listen for one word, one detail, one emotion, and turn it into the next 10 minutes of conversation. If you want to become someone people genuinely enjoy talking to, stay with me, and comment Fluent if you are ready to kill awkward silence for good. Chapter 1. Stop trying to sound interesting. The fastest way to make a conversation feel hard is to keep asking yourself, what should I say next? The moment you try too hard to sound smart, funny, impressive, or interesting, you stop listening. Your mind leaves the conversation and starts performing. You begin checking every sentence before you say it. Is this good enough? Will they like this? Do I sound boring? And while you are busy thinking about yourself, you miss the most important thing. The person in front of you is already giving you something to talk about. Great conversationalists are not always the funniest people in the room. They are not people who know 1,000 topics. They are people who are deeply present. They listen for small details. They notice emotion. They hear the word that has energy behind it. Someone says, work has been crazy lately. A nervous talker thinks, what topic should I change to? A good conversationalist thinks, crazy how? That simple shift changes everything. Stop trying to create the perfect conversation. Start discovering the conversation that is already there. You do not need a clever line every 10 seconds. You need curiosity. You need attention. You need the courage to stay with what the other person just said. People rarely remember the person who tried hardest to impress them. They remember the person who made them feel comfortable enough to be themselves. So when your mind goes blank, do not panic. Do not search for a new topic. Look back at their last sentence. There is usually a door hiding inside it. And once you stop trying to be interesting, something surprising happens. You become much more interesting to talk to. Chapter 2. Every sentence hides a door. Most people run out of things to say for one simple reason. They hear words, but they do not hear openings. Almost every sentence gives you somewhere to go. Someone says, I went to Lahore last weekend. That sentence has many doors. Why did they go? Who went with them? What did they enjoy? Was it their first time? Did something unexpected happen? What would they go back for? One short sentence can create 5 new conversations, but nervous people often miss all of them. They hear, I went to Lahore. Then they say, oh nice. And the conversation dies. The problem was never a lack of topics. The problem was a lack of attention. A strong conversationalist listens for the part with life inside it. If someone says, I almost quit my job last month, do not jump to another subject. That sentence is full of emotion. Stay there. You can say, what happened? Or, what made you reach that point? Now the conversation becomes real. This is the secret. Do not search your mind for a new topic. Search their sentence for the next door. Listen for people, places, feelings, changes, problems, plans, surprises. Anything with emotion or meaning can become your next question, and when you follow the right detail, people feel something powerful. They feel that you are not just waiting for your turn to speak, you are actually with them. That is when small talk starts disappearing. That is when people begin telling stories. That is when a simple conversation becomes interesting without force. You do not need 20 topics ready in your head. You need one skill: hear the door, then open it. Once you learn that, silence becomes much less frightening. Because almost every sentence already contains your next move. Chapter 3. Find the word worth following. Not every word in a conversation matters equally. Some words are just information. But some words carry emotion, energy, tension, excitement, fear, or meaning. Those are the words you should follow. Imagine someone says, I finally started my own business, but honestly, it has been harder than I expected. A weak listener hears, business, so they ask, what kind of business? That is fine. But a stronger listener hears, harder than I expected. That is where the real conversation is hiding. You might ask, what has been the hardest part? Now you are no longer talking about a business. You are talking about their experience, their struggle, their decisions, their story. And stories are where conversations come alive. This is one of the biggest differences between average talkers and great conversationalists. Average talkers follow subjects. Great conversationalists follow meaning. Listen carefully when someone says words like, I loved, I hated, I almost, I never expected, I finally, I wish, I was terrified, I cannot believe. Those words are signals. They are telling you, there is something important here. Do not rush past it. Pick it up. Someone says, I almost moved to another country last year. Do not reply, oh cool. Ask, almost? What stopped you? One word, almost, can open an entire story. This is why you do not need hundreds of questions prepared. You need to become good at noticing the word that carries weight. The moment you hear it, stay there a little longer. Let the person explain. Let them remember. Let them feel. Because the best conversations are rarely created by saying more. They are created by noticing what deserves more. Train yourself to catch that one powerful word, and you will start finding conversations inside sentences that everyone else ignores. Chapter 4. Make them want to keep talking. A great conversation does not happen because you know the perfect words. It happens because the other person feels something very simple. I want to keep talking to this person. That feeling is powerful, and it is not created by talking more. It is created by making the other person feel safe, heard, and interesting. Think about the people you enjoy talking to. Usually they do not make you feel like you are being tested. They do not make you feel rushed. They do not look bored while you speak. They do not suddenly turn every story back to themselves. Instead, they give you space. They react. They listen. They make you feel that what you are saying matters. That is the real skill. If someone tells you, I have been trying to learn guitar for a few months, you could simply say, that is nice, and the conversation may end there. Or you could say, what made you want to start? Now something changes. You are not only asking about the guitar, you are asking about the reason behind it. Maybe they say, my father used to play when I was young. Now the conversation has emotion, memory, family, meaning. You can ask, did he teach you anything? And suddenly you are inside a real story. This is what strong conversationalists understand. People keep talking when they feel you are interested in the person, not only the topic. That difference matters. If someone says, I love traveling, you can ask, what countries have you visited? That is normal, but you can go deeper. What is one place you still think about? Now they have to feel before they answer. They may smile. They may remember something. They may tell you about a tiny restaurant in another city, a sunrise they saw, a stranger they met, or a moment they never forgot. That is where a conversation becomes memorable. You are not collecting facts, you are opening memories. And there is another secret. Your reaction teaches people how much they should share with you. Imagine someone tells you, I actually changed careers last year. If you respond with no emotion, oh, okay, you quietly tell them, this is not very interesting. But if you say, really, that is a big change, what made you do it? You send a different message. Tell me more. People notice these signals. Your face matters. Your voice matters. Your attention matters. A small smile can encourage someone. A surprised reaction can show interest. A simple sentence like, no way, what happened next, can keep a story alive. You do not need to fake excitement. You only need to show real interest when something deserves it. And this is important. Do not interrupt too quickly. Some people become nervous during silence, so they rush to fill every empty second. They ask another question before the person has finished thinking. They change the subject. They start talking about themselves, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait. Someone says, I do not know. That year changed me a lot. Pause. Let them think. Do not attack the silence. The next sentence may be the most honest thing they say. Great conversationalists understand that silence is not always a problem. Sometimes silence is where the deeper answer is being formed. Another mistake is trying to prove that you relate to everything. Someone says, my trip to Italy was amazing. You immediately say, I went to Italy too. Now the attention moves away from them. There is nothing wrong with sharing your own experience. In fact, you should. But timing matters. First, stay with their story. Ask, what did you love most about it? Let them answer. Then you can say, I understand that. I had a similar feeling when I went there. Now you are connecting, not stealing the conversation. There is a huge difference. Connection says, I understand you. Competition says, now listen to my better story. Connect core. People can feel the difference immediately. If you want someone to enjoy talking to you, stop trying to win the conversation. Do not try to be the funniest. Do not try to have the best story. Do not try to prove you know more. Give the conversation room to breathe. Sometimes let them shine. Sometimes share something yourself. Sometimes ask. Sometimes react. Sometimes simply listen. That balance creates flow. And when the conversation starts becoming deeper, remember one rule. Follow emotion before information. If someone says, "I got the promotion, but I am actually nervous about it," the promotion is information. The nervousness is emotion. Which one has more life? The nervousness. Ask, "What are you most nervous about?" Now you have entered the real conversation. Maybe they are scared of failing. Maybe they feel pressure. Maybe they do not believe they deserve the opportunity. Maybe they are excited and afraid at the same time. One emotional word can open a conversation that lasts 20 minutes. This is why people who are good at conversation rarely seem desperate for topics. They are not jumping from subject to subject. They are going deeper into what is already there. And the deeper you go, the more natural the conversation becomes. The other person starts doing more of the work. They remember new things. They connect ideas. They ask you questions too. The conversation begins to move by itself. That is the goal. You should not feel like you are carrying the entire conversation on your back. You want to create enough comfort and curiosity that both people begin carrying it together. So the next time someone is talking to you, stop asking, "What can I say that will make me interesting?" Ask something better. What can I notice that will make them want to continue? That question changes everything, because people do not always remember the clever things you said, but they remember how easy it felt to talk to you. They remember that you listened. They remember that you noticed. They remember that you gave their story room. And when someone feels that around you, you do not have to fight to keep the conversation alive. They will help you keep it alive. Chapter 5. Escape the question-answer trap. One of the biggest reasons conversations become boring is simple. Too many questions, one after another. What do you do? Where are you from? How long have you lived here? Do you like your job? What do you do on weekends? These are normal questions. But when you keep asking without giving anything back, the conversation starts to feel like an interview. The other person answers. You ask again. They answer. You ask again. And after a few minutes, both people feel tired. A real conversation has a different rhythm. It is not question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It is ask, listen, react, share, return. That small change can completely transform the way you talk to people. Imagine you meet someone and ask, "What do you do?" They say, "I work in graphic design." You could immediately ask, "How long have you been doing that?" That keeps the interview going. Or you could say, "Graphic design? I always find it interesting how some people can look at an empty screen and already see what they want to create. What kind of work do you enjoy most?" Now you have done something important. You did not only ask, you added something. You gave them a thought they can react to. This is what makes conversation feel natural. Do not make the other person create everything. Give them material too. If you want someone to open up, you must sometimes open up first. You do not need to tell them your entire life story. A small piece is enough. Suppose someone says, "I love waking up early." Instead of firing another question immediately, you might say, "I wish I were naturally good at that. When I wake up early, the whole day feels longer, but getting out of bed is still the battle." Then ask, "What made you become an early riser?" Now the conversation feels human. You shared something. Then you invited them back in. That is very different from an interview. Think of conversation like throwing a ball. If you keep throwing questions at someone, eventually it feels like work. But if you catch what they give you, add something, and throw it back, you create rhythm. That rhythm is what people call chemistry. It often looks natural from the outside, but there is a pattern underneath it. Here is the pattern. Ask something, listen carefully, react honestly, add a small piece of yourself, then give the conversation back. For example, "What kind of music do you listen to?" "I listen to a lot of old rock." "Really? I went through a huge old rock phase a few years ago." There is something about music from that time that feels different. What pulled you into it? Notice what happened. You did not turn the conversation into a speech about yourself. You shared just enough to create connection. Then you returned the focus. That is the skill. And there is another mistake people make when they are nervous. They believe they must always ask questions to keep the conversation alive, so they ask anything they can think of. How many brothers do you have? What car do you drive? What school did you attend? Do you like coffee? None of these questions are terrible, but random questions create random conversations. There is no thread, no direction, no feeling. The conversation becomes a list. A stronger approach is to stay connected to what was just said. Someone says, "I recently moved into my own place." Instead of asking, "Do you have siblings?" stay with the current thread. You could say, "That must feel different after living with other people. What has surprised you most about living alone?" Now the conversation has continuity. One idea naturally creates the next one, and that is what you want. A strong conversation feels connected. A weak conversation feels like changing television channels every 30 seconds. New topic. New topic. New topic. New topic. You never stay anywhere long enough for something interesting to happen. Stop being afraid of staying on one subject. You do not need 15 topics in 5 minutes. Sometimes one good topic can carry an entire conversation. Suppose someone says, "I want to start traveling alone." There are many places you can go from there. What made you want to try it? Where would you go first? What scares you about it? What excites you most? Have you traveled alone before? Do your friends think you are crazy? Now imagine their answer is, "I think I just want to prove to myself that I can do something alone." That sentence is much more interesting than travel. Now you are talking about independence, confidence, fear, growth, maybe even identity. This is how good conversations become deeper. You start with something small, you follow what has energy, and you allow the subject to change naturally. Do not force depth either. That is important. You do not need to turn every conversation into a deep discussion about childhood, fear, dreams, and purpose. Sometimes people simply want to laugh. Sometimes they want light conversation. Sometimes they want to complain about bad traffic. Sometimes they want to talk about food. Your job is not to make every conversation meaningful. Your job is to feel where the conversation wants to go. If the other person gives short answers, do not attack them with deeper questions. Give more of yourself. Someone says, "Yeah, I like movies." Instead of asking, "What movies?" then, "What actors?" then, "What genres?" Try giving them something easier to grab. You might say, "I always tell myself I will watch something serious. Then somehow I end up watching the same comfortable movie again." Now they have more options. They might laugh. They might tell you their comfort movie. They might say they do the same thing. They might disagree. You gave them a doorway. That is an important rule. When the other person gives little, give them more to work with. Do not punish a quiet person with more questions. Make the conversation easier for them. Offer an opinion. Share a small story. Make an observation. Say something playful. Then see what they pick up. For example, instead of, "Do you like your city?" try, "I think every city has one thing locals complain about but secretly miss when they leave. What is it here?" That feels different. It gives the question personality. It is easier to answer in an interesting way. Instead of, "What do you do for fun?" try, "What is something you can do for hours and completely forget the time?" Now you are asking for a real answer, not a social script. But remember, the goal is not to memorize clever questions. The goal is to understand the rhythm. You ask, they answer, you notice something, you respond. You give something back, then the conversation moves again, and sometimes the best response is not another question at all. Someone says, "My first day at that job was terrible." You could ask, "What happened?" That works, but you could also laugh and say, "That sentence already sounds like there is a story behind it." Now they will probably tell you. You did not even need to ask directly. Someone says, "My family is extremely competitive." You could say, "I can already imagine family game night being dangerous." They may laugh and say, "You have no idea." And now the story begins. That is conversation. Not every move has to be a question. You can use reactions, observations, humor, opinions, small stories, guesses, connections, and then questions when they actually help. This gives you far more tools. Because if the only tool you know is asking questions, you will always feel pressure to invent another one. But once you learn to react and contribute, conversation becomes much easier. There is also something powerful about disagreement. Many people think being a good conversationalist means agreeing with everything. It does not. Respectful disagreement can create energy. Someone says, "Working from home is always better." You might say, "I understand the freedom, but I think I would slowly become friends with my refrigerator." That small disagreement gives the conversation life. Maybe they laugh. Maybe they explain why they love working from home. Maybe you compare experiences. The important thing is that you are not only interviewing them, you are showing personality. Because this is the truth. People cannot connect with you if you never give them anything of yourself to connect with. Listening is important. Curiosity is important. Questions are important. But you must also be present as a person, have opinions, share reactions, tell small stories, let people discover you while you discover them. That is what separates conversation from interrogation. And there is a simple test you can use. After talking to someone for 5 minutes, ask yourself, have I only learned about them, or have they also learned something about me? If the answer is that they know nothing about you, you may be asking too much and sharing too little. If they know your entire life story, and you know nothing about them, you may be sharing too much. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, back and forth, give and receive, speak and listen. That is where connection lives. So next time you feel the urge to throw another question into the conversation, stop for 1 second. Ask yourself, can I react first? Can I add a thought? Can I share something small? Can I make an observation? Can I connect their answer to something? Then return the conversation naturally. The strongest conversations do not feel like someone is leading and someone is answering. They feel like two people building something together. One person places a piece, the other adds another. The conversation grows. And when you learn that rhythm, you stop worrying so much about running out of questions, because you finally understand, you were never supposed to survive a conversation by asking better questions forever. You were supposed to participate in it. Chapter 6. Create chemistry with details. Most people think chemistry is something mysterious. They think you either have it with someone or you do not. But in conversation, chemistry is often created by something much simpler. Attention to small details. The people who feel easy to talk to are usually the people who notice more. They remember what you said. They notice the word you almost skipped over. They bring back something from 5 minutes ago. They connect one part of your story to another. And when they do that, you feel something powerful. This person is really listening to me. That feeling creates connection faster than trying to sound impressive. Imagine someone tells you, I started running in the mornings because my friend convinced me to try it. Most people will hear, running. So they ask, how far do you run? That is fine. But there are more interesting details inside the sentence. They said, my friend convinced me. You could say, so this was not even your idea at first. They might laugh, no, I hated running. Now you have something. You can say, and somehow you became the person who wakes up early to run. Now the conversation feels alive. Why? Because you are using their details, not pulling random topics from your own head. That is one of the strongest conversation skills you can learn. Stop treating details like decoration. Details are fuel. A person tells you they grew up in a small town. That is a detail. They tell you they are the youngest in their family. That is a detail. They mention they hate flying. That is a detail. They say they always wanted to learn piano. That is a detail. They say their mother makes the best food in the family. That is a detail. Every small detail can become something you use later. And this is where conversation becomes much more interesting. Suppose early in the conversation someone says, I am terrible at cooking. You talk about other things for 10 minutes. Later they tell you, I am thinking about inviting everyone to my place for dinner. You could simply say, that sounds fun. Or you could smile and say, wait, the person who told me 10 minutes ago that they are terrible at cooking is now hosting dinner? That is a callback. And callbacks are powerful. They show that you were paying attention. They create humor. They create familiarity. They make a new conversation feel like it already has history. That is chemistry. It is not always some magical spark. Sometimes it is simply two people building little connections between moments. A detail appears. You remember it. Later, you bring it back. Now the conversation has a shared memory, even if you met only 20 minutes ago. This is why great conversationalists often seem naturally charming. They are not always saying amazing things. They are simply using what the conversation gives them. They turn small details into shared moments, and shared moments create closeness. Think about this. If you tell someone, I have a big presentation tomorrow, and 3 days later they ask, how did that presentation go? How does that make you feel? Probably good. Why? Because they remembered. That one small question says, what you told me mattered enough for me to keep it in my mind. People love that feeling. You do not need to remember every single detail about every person. That would be impossible. But when something has emotion, importance, or personality behind it, remember it. A new job, a difficult meeting, a trip, a family event, a goal, a fear, something they are excited about, something they are trying to change. Those details can become bridges in future conversations. Instead of starting from zero every time, you continue where the last conversation ended. That is how relationships begin to feel deeper. Imagine seeing someone again and saying, "Last time you said you were trying to learn how to drive. Did you finally get brave enough to go on the main road?" That is much stronger than, "So, what is new?" One feels generic, the other feels personal. And there is an important lesson here. People do not want to feel like one conversation in 100 conversations. They want to feel seen. Remembering details makes people feel seen. But do not turn this into a memory contest. The goal is not to prove, "Look how much I remember about you." That can feel strange. Keep it natural. Use details when they fit. Do not force them. If someone once told you they liked coffee, you do not need to remind them about coffee every time you meet. But if you walk past a strange coffee shop together, you might say, "This seems like exactly the kind of place you would make me try." Now the detail becomes playful. You are creating a little world between the two of you. That is what good chemistry often feels like. A collection of small things that only make sense because you have been paying attention. There is another kind of detail that matters. Emotional details. These are even more important than facts. Maybe someone says, "I got accepted into the program." That is the fact. But they say it with a huge smile. That smile is information too. You could say, "You look more relieved than excited." Maybe they laugh and say, I was sure I would not get in." Now you have found the deeper story. Sometimes people say one thing with words and something more with their face, voice, or body. They say, "It was fine." But their voice says, "It was definitely not fine." A good conversationalist notices. You might gently say, "That did not sound like a very convincing fine." Now they have a choice. They can laugh and move on, or they can open up. That is important. Notice without pushing. Conversation is not about forcing people to reveal things. It is about giving them a safe door if they want to walk through it. Someone says, "I guess the meeting went okay." You might say, "You do not sound very happy about it." Maybe they answer, "It was just frustrating." Now you can follow that. But if they say, "No, really it was fine," let it go. Good conversation requires sensitivity. Pay attention, but do not become aggressive. Curiosity without respect becomes pressure, and pressure kills connection. The goal is to make people feel comfortable, not examined. Small details also help you create better humor. You do not need to be a comedian. Some of the best humor in conversation comes from remembering something that happened earlier. Suppose someone tells you, "I always get lost, even with maps." Later they are giving directions. You can say, "I am not sure I trust directions from the person who admitted they get lost with a map." That is light, personal, connected to the conversation. You did not need a joke prepared. The conversation created the joke for you. This is why people who pay attention rarely run out of things to say. They have more material. They are not depending only on new ideas. They are using what has already happened. Another example, someone tells you, "I am trying to stop buying things I do not need." 20 minutes later they see something in a shop and say, "I need that." You look at them and say, "So the new lifestyle lasted 20 minutes. That creates a shared moment. The humor works because you remembered, and now both of you have a tiny inside joke. Inside jokes are strong because they make two people feel like they share something. Even a very small joke can create this feeling. Maybe you both notice that the waiter keeps bringing the wrong order. Later, one of you says, "I am scared to ask for water now." That little moment becomes yours. If you meet again, you might even mention it. And suddenly the conversation has history. That is how chemistry grows, not through endless brilliant lines, through small moments that repeat, connect, and become familiar. But there is another side to details. You also need to give people details about yourself. If you speak in very general ways, you give people nothing to work with. For example, someone asks, "What did you do this weekend?" You say, "Nothing much." Conversation dead. But maybe you actually watched an old movie, tried to cook something, visited a relative, cleaned your room, took a long walk, or spent 2 hours trying to fix something that should have taken 10 minutes. Any of those details could create conversation. Instead of, "Nothing much," say, "I tried to cook something new and nearly destroyed the kitchen." Now the other person has something to grab. What were you making? What happened? Can you actually cook? The detail did the work. This is a huge lesson. If you want better conversations, give better material. Do not make your answers flat. You do not need to speak for 5 minutes. Just add one interesting detail. Question: how was your weekend? Weak answer, good. Better answer, good. I went to a family dinner that somehow turned into a 3-hour argument about where everyone should travel next year. Now there are several possible doors: family, travel, arguments, next year, where you want to go. The conversation can move naturally. Question: what do you do? Weak answer: I work in marketing. Better answer: I work in marketing. Half my job is trying to understand why people click things online. Now the other person may smile. They may ask what you mean. They may talk about advertising. They may tell you what they do. A little detail gives your answer shape. This is one of the easiest ways to become more interesting without trying to impress anyone. Be specific. Instead of, I like music, say, I listen to calm music when I work, but somehow my gym playlist sounds like I am preparing for battle. That sounds more human. Instead of, I like traveling, say, I love traveling, but I am the person who plans everything and then ignores the plan when I arrive. Again, specific. People connect with specifics. General answers are hard to hold. Details give the other person handles, something they can grab, something they can question, something they can relate to, something they can laugh about, and this creates a beautiful cycle. You give a detail, they grab it. They give a detail, you grab that. Back and forth. Now the conversation is moving without force. There is no panic, no desperate search for the next topic. You are simply building from what is already there. This also makes you a better storyteller. Many people tell stories badly because they either give too little detail or far too much. Too little sounds like, I went out, we ate, it was fun, there is nothing to feel. Too much sounds like, so first I woke up at 8:17, then I checked my phone, then I got dressed, then I could not find my keys. The listener gets lost. Good storytelling uses the right details, the strange detail, the emotional detail, the funny detail, the one thing that makes the moment clear. Instead of, my flight was bad, say, my flight was so rough that even the flight attendant stopped smiling. Now we can see it. Instead of, the restaurant was strange, say, the menu had 20 pages, and somehow I still could not find one thing I wanted. Now there is a picture. Specific details make people see what you saw. That pulls them into your story. But remember, details should serve the conversation. Do not drown people in them. You are not giving a police report. You are giving the listener enough to feel the moment. There is one more powerful habit you can build. When someone tells you something, ask yourself quietly, what is unique about what they just said? Not, what question can I ask? But, what is unique here? Maybe they say, I started boxing last year. Unique detail, why boxing? Maybe they say, I hate birthdays. Unique detail, that is unusual. Maybe they say, I have never watched television. Unique detail, definitely unusual. Maybe they say, I moved 7 times as a child. Unique detail, 7 times. You can follow what stands out. Someone says, I hate birthdays. Instead of, when is your birthday? Say, you hate birthdays. I feel like there is a story behind that. That is stronger. They may explain. Now the conversation has personality. Someone says, I have moved 7 times. You could say, 7? At that point, were you even unpacking your boxes? Maybe they laugh. Then you can ask, did you enjoy moving, or did you hate starting over? Now you have humor and depth, all from one detail. This skill also helps in group conversations. In a group, people often compete to say something new, but you can become more engaging by connecting things people already said. One person says, I love mountain trips. Later someone else says, I hate beaches. You might say, okay, so if you two ever plan a holiday together, I already see a problem. That connects 2 details. Everyone understands the moment. You are helping the conversation feel like one shared experience instead of several people waiting for their turn. That is social intelligence. And the good news is that you can train it. For the next few conversations you have, try 3 simple habits. First, notice one detail that has energy. Second, remember one detail long enough to bring it back later. Third, give one specific detail when you answer a question. That is enough. You do not need to change your entire personality. You do not need to become louder. You do not need to memorize clever lines. You only need to become more awake to what is already happening. Because the richest conversations are often built from the smallest things: a word, a reaction, a strange habit, a tiny story, a forgotten detail brought back at exactly the right moment. And when you begin noticing these things, something changes. People start feeling that conversations with you are different, not because you perform better, Not because you dominate the room, not because you always know what to say, but because when people speak, their words do not disappear. You catch them, you remember them, you build with them, and that creates one of the strongest feelings a conversation can give. This person gets me. That is where chemistry begins, not in the perfect opening line, not in endless questions, not in trying to be impressive. It begins when you care enough to notice what most people miss. So stop searching for bigger topics, start catching smaller details, because sometimes one tiny detail is all you need to turn an ordinary conversation into one that both people remember. Chapter 7. Talk to anyone without a script. The final goal is not to memorize more questions. It is not to collect clever opening lines. It is not to keep a list of topics inside your head. It is not to prepare 10 stories before meeting someone. The real goal is much bigger, to become comfortable enough that you can walk into almost any conversation without needing a script. Because scripts can help you begin, but they cannot carry a real conversation. Real people are unpredictable. They change topics. They give strange answers. They become excited about things you did not expect. They tell stories you could never prepare for. They sometimes give you one-word answers. Sometimes they talk too much. Sometimes they are nervous. Sometimes you are nervous. And that is exactly why the strongest conversationalists do not depend on perfect lines. They depend on skills. They know how to listen. They know how to notice. They know how to react. They know how to share. They know how to follow emotion. They know how to use details. And most importantly, they trust themselves enough to stay present. That is freedom. Because when you trust yourself in conversation, you stop asking, "What am I supposed to say?" and you start asking, "What is happening here right now?" That question changes everything. Imagine you are meeting someone for the first time. You could enter the conversation with 10 prepared questions. Where are you from? What do you do? What do you do for fun? Do you have siblings? What music do you like? What movies do you watch? Those questions may help for a few minutes. But sooner or later, the script ends. Then what? If you have learned the skills from the earlier chapters, you do not panic. You listen. Someone says, "I just moved here 2 months ago. There is your next direction." You might say, 2 months. So you are still in that stage where everything feels new. They say, "Exactly. I still get lost all the time." Now you have another direction. You smile. "So you know the city mostly through wrong turns?" They laugh. "Yes, I found my favorite coffee shop because I got completely lost." Now you have another direction. "Okay, that actually sounds like a successful mistake." And now maybe they tell you about the coffee shop, then the neighborhood, then why they moved, then their old city, then something they miss, then something they are excited about. Notice what happened. You did not need a script. You used what was happening. That is the skill you want. A conversation is not a test where you must know the next answer. It is more like walking down a path together. You can only see a little distance ahead, and that is enough. You do not need to know where the conversation will be 10 minutes from now. You only need to know what is worth following right now. This is especially important if you are naturally quiet. Many quiet people believe good conversation belongs to fast thinkers. They watch someone who can speak easily and think, "I could never do that." But being quick is not the same as being good. A person can talk constantly and still be terrible at conversation. They may interrupt. They may ignore what others say. They may turn everything back to themselves. They may tell long stories nobody asked for. Meanwhile, a quieter person can become an excellent conversationalist because they notice more. They listen more carefully. They choose better moments. They make people feel heard. You do not need to become the loudest person in the room. You need to become comfortable with your own way of communicating. Maybe you take an extra second before answering. That is fine. Maybe you are better one-on-one than in large groups. That is fine. Maybe you are not naturally funny. That is fine too. Conversation is not a performance competition. The goal is connection. And connection can come from calmness just as easily as confidence. In fact, sometimes the person who speaks less but listens deeply becomes the person everyone wants to talk to. Why? Because most people spend their day being half-heard. Someone is looking at their phone. Someone interrupts them. Someone is already preparing a reply. Someone changes the subject. So when they finally meet a person who gives them full attention, it feels rare. You can become that person, and you do not need a script to do it. You need presence. There is another reason scripts create problems. They make you believe there is a correct thing to say. There usually is not. Imagine someone tells you, I am thinking about leaving my job. What is the perfect response? There is no perfect response. You could say, what is making you want to leave? Or, that sounds like a big decision. Or, have you been feeling this way for a while? Or, you sounded tired when you said that. Or even, are you excited about leaving, or mostly scared? Several responses could work. The important thing is not finding the perfect line. The important thing is responding to what you noticed. That is why overthinking is so dangerous in conversation. You hear someone speak, then instead of responding, your brain starts searching. What is the smartest answer? What would a confident person say? Was that response too boring? Should I make a joke? Am I talking enough? And by the time you finish thinking, the moment has passed. So train yourself to respond before you polish everything, not carelessly, naturally. If you think something is funny, smile. If something surprises you, show surprise. If you are curious, ask. If you relate, share. If you do not understand, say, what do you mean? Simple responses often create better conversations than clever ones. Someone tells you, I left my hometown at 18 and never went back. You do not need a brilliant answer. You can simply say, never. That one word, said with real curiosity, may be enough. They may begin telling you the whole story. This is an important lesson. Good conversation is often simpler than nervous people make it. You are not trying to create a television interview. You are talking to another human being. React like one. If something is strange, say it is strange. If something sounds difficult, say, that sounds difficult. If something sounds exciting, say, you look really excited about that. If you disagree, disagree kindly. If you need a moment to think, take one. Normal conversation is full of imperfect little moments. That is what makes it feel real. There may even be silence, and silence does not mean you failed. This is one of the biggest fears people have. The conversation becomes quiet for 3 seconds, and immediately they think, it is dying. Then panic begins. Their mind screams, say something, so they throw out a random question. Do you have pets? The other person says, no. Now the panic becomes worse, but silence is normal. People think, people breathe, people look around. People finish one subject before another begins. You do not need to fight every pause. Sometimes a calm pause actually makes you look more comfortable. And confidence in conversation is often not about speaking more. It is about not being frightened by small moments of nothing. Imagine 2 people sitting together. The conversation pauses. One person starts shaking inside. They look around desperately. They ask the first question that enters their mind. The other person simply takes a sip of their drink and smiles. Which person feels more socially comfortable? Usually the second, because they are not treating silence like danger. Learn that. Silence is not always rejection. Silence is not always awkward. Sometimes it is simply a pause, and if you remain calm, another thought often appears naturally. You notice something around you. You remember an earlier detail. They say something, you say something. The conversation continues. This is why becoming good at conversation also requires becoming good at not panicking. Your mind going blank is not an emergency. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to smile. You are allowed to say, I completely lost my thought for a second. You are allowed to be human. Sometimes admitting a small awkward moment actually removes the awkwardness. The problem is usually not the pause itself. The problem is the fear you attach to it. When you think, this is terrible, they think I am boring, your body changes. You become tense. You stop listening. You start performing. But when you think, it is just a pause, you stay relaxed. And relaxed people are much easier to talk to. There is another important skill. Stop judging conversations too quickly. Not every person will become your best friend. Not every conversation will be exciting. Sometimes 2 people simply do not have much energy together. That does not mean you failed. Sometimes the other person is tired. Sometimes they are distracted. Sometimes they are shy. Sometimes they do not want to talk. Sometimes you have very different personalities. You cannot control all of that. Your job is not to make every person love talking to you. Your job is to become someone who can enter conversations with openness, skill, and calmness. That is enough. This removes a huge amount of pressure. Because when you are desperate for every interaction to go well, you become unnatural. You start performing for approval. You laugh too hard. You agree with everything. You ask too many questions. You speak when you have nothing to say. You become afraid to disagree. And slowly, The conversation stops being about connection. It becomes about being accepted. That is exhausting. A better mindset is, I am here to discover whether we connect. Not, I must make them like me. That one change gives you your personality back. Now you can be curious without begging for approval. You can share your real opinions. You can laugh naturally. You can disagree respectfully. You can let the conversation end if it has reached its natural end. That is social confidence. And here is something many people need to hear. You do not have to keep every conversation alive forever. Sometimes a conversation should end. Maybe you have talked for 10 minutes. The energy is dropping. Neither person has much more to say. That is okay. You can say, it was really nice talking to you. Or, I am going to grab another drink, but I am glad we talked. Or, I should go say hello to a few people, but I enjoyed this. Leaving comfortably is also part of being a good conversationalist. You do not need to squeeze another 5 minutes out of a conversation that has naturally finished. Knowing when to stop is a form of confidence. And strangely, when you stop fearing endings, beginnings become easier too, because you know you are not trapped. You can start talking to someone, see where it goes, enjoy it. And if it ends, it ends. That mindset makes approaching people much less frightening. You are no longer thinking, what if I have to keep this conversation alive for 20 minutes? You only need to begin. Maybe you say, how do you know everyone here? Maybe, that looks much better than what I ordered. Maybe, have you been here before? Maybe you simply comment on what is happening around you. The first sentence does not need to be amazing. That is another myth. People spend too much energy searching for perfect openers, but the opening line is usually forgotten after 30 seconds. What matters is what happens after the opening. You can start with a very ordinary sentence and still have an amazing conversation. You can also start with a clever line and then have nowhere to go. The power is not in the opener. The power is in your ability to build. That is why all the earlier skills matter. You stop trying to sound interesting. You listen for doors. You find the word worth following. You make people want to keep talking. You escape the interview trap. You create chemistry with details. And once those skills start working together, conversation changes. You no longer feel like you are searching for things to say. You are responding to what is already there. Suppose you meet someone and say, how do you know the host? They answer, we worked together years ago. Old version of you. Oh, nice. What do you do now? New version. Years ago, so you two actually stayed in touch? They say, kind of. We lost contact for about 5 years. Now there is something interesting. 5 years. What brought you back into each other's lives? They explain. Maybe it was a wedding, a new job, a random message, a mutual friend. Now they tell a story. Inside that story, another detail appears. You follow that. This is how a conversation can move for 20 minutes without you preparing anything. Not because you always know what to say, because you know how to use what appears. And that ability can be trained. Here is a simple practice. For 1 week, stop trying to be impressive in conversations. Instead, give yourself one goal. Notice more. Notice the unusual word. Notice when someone's face changes. Notice when their voice becomes excited. Notice when they say, actually. Notice when they say, the funny thing is. Notice when they say, I never thought. Notice when they mention a person twice. Notice when they suddenly speak faster. Notice when they become quieter. All of these are signals. Conversation is full of signals. The more signals you notice, the less often you will feel empty. Then practice another skill. Answer with one extra detail. If someone asks how your day was, do not always say, good. Give them one small piece. Good. I spent half the morning fixing something that broke again 10 minutes later. Now they have something. If someone asks what you did yesterday, do not say, nothing. Say, I planned to have a productive day and somehow spent an hour reorganizing things I did not need to reorganize. That has personality. You are giving conversation material. Then practice one more thing. Bring something back. If they mentioned something earlier, use it again. They say they hate spicy food. Later someone mentions a very spicy restaurant. You say, so I assume you are definitely not choosing dinner. Simple, natural. Now the conversation feels connected. These tiny habits become automatic with repetition. And when they become automatic, something beautiful happens. You stop watching yourself so closely. You stop hearing your own voice in your head while you speak. You stop checking whether every sentence sounds good. You begin enjoying the actual person in front of you. That is the point. Conversation should not feel like you are standing outside yourself, judging every move. It should feel like participation. You say something, they respond. You become curious. You laugh. You remember something. You disagree. You tell a story. They interrupt because they suddenly remembered something. You follow it. That is alive. And alive conversations are never perfectly controlled. Sometimes the best moment comes from a mistake. You misunderstand something. They correct you. Both of you laugh. Sometimes you say something strange. Sometimes a joke fails. Sometimes you forget a name. Sometimes you tell a story badly. None of this destroys a conversation. Trying to look perfect often destroys it more. People relax around people who allow themselves to be human. Perfection creates distance. Naturalness creates warmth. So stop treating every small mistake like evidence that you are socially bad. A strange sentence is just a strange sentence. A failed joke is just a failed joke. An awkward moment is just a moment. Move on. Strong conversationalists recover quickly because they do not turn every mistake into a disaster. That is another kind of confidence. Recovery. Maybe you ask, "So how is your sister?" They say, "I do not have a sister." You got confused. You can simply smile and say, "I have completely mixed up two conversations. Good start for me." You both may laugh. Done. No need to panic. Maybe you forget their name. Instead of avoiding it all night, say, "I am embarrassed, but I have forgotten your name." They tell you. Conversation continues. Social confidence is not knowing how to avoid every uncomfortable moment. It is knowing you can survive them. That is freedom. And once you understand this, talking to strangers becomes easier. Talking to coworkers becomes easier. Talking on dates becomes easier. Talking at events becomes easier. Talking to people you admire becomes easier, because you no longer need to become a special version of yourself for each person. You are using the same basic skills everywhere. Be present, be curious, listen closely, react honestly, give something back, follow what has energy. That is enough. The person may be older than you. You can still be curious. They may be more successful than you. You can still listen. They may be very attractive. You can still notice details. They may be quiet. You can give them more material. They may be talkative. You can guide the conversation without fighting for space. The principles remain the same, and this is the final shift. Stop measuring your conversation skill by how much you speak. Measure it by what happens between you and the other person. Did the conversation feel easier after a few minutes? Did both people contribute? Did you discover something real? Did they seem comfortable? Did you listen? Did you share? Did the conversation have moments of laughter, curiosity, surprise, or honesty? That matters far more than how many clever sentences you produced, because being a great conversationalist is not about becoming a machine that never runs out of words. Sometimes great conversationalists say very little, but what they say fits the moment. They know when to ask, when to share, when to laugh, when to stay quiet, when to go deeper, when to change direction, when to let something go. That is not memorization, that is awareness. And awareness becomes stronger every time you practice it. So before your next conversation, do not prepare 20 questions. Do not rehearse every possible response. Do not tell yourself, "I have to be interesting." Walk in with something simpler. "I am going to pay attention." That one promise can carry you much further than a script, because when you pay attention, people give you material. Their words give you material. Their emotions give you material. The place around you gives you material. Your own reactions give you material. Your shared moments give you material. There is almost always something available. You only stop seeing it when fear turns your attention inward. So when your mind begins saying, "What should I say next?" bring yourself back. Look at the person. Remember the last thing they said. Ask yourself, "What did I notice?" Maybe one word stood out. Maybe there is a story underneath their answer. Maybe you have something small to share. Maybe there is an earlier detail you can bring back. Maybe the conversation simply needs a quiet second. Trust that. You do not need to manufacture every moment. Sometimes you only need to stop getting in the way of it. That is when conversation begins to feel light. You stop carrying it. You start experiencing it. And eventually, the fear of running out of things to say begins to disappear. Not because you now know thousands of things to say, but because you finally understand the deeper truth. A good conversation is not created by having endless words ready. It is created by knowing how to find the next moment inside the one you are already in. Listen, notice, respond, share, return, and continue. That is how you talk to someone you just met. That is how you talk to someone you already know. That is how you turn small talk into something real. That is how you make people feel comfortable around you. And that is how you become the person who can enter a room without carrying a script in your head, because you no longer need one. You have learned how to talk to the person, not to the plan. There is one final level of conversation that changes everything. It is the moment you stop trying to control where the conversation goes. Most people feel safe only when they know what comes next. They want a plan, a question ready, a topic ready, a story ready. But real conversation becomes powerful when you can stay calm even when you do not know the next sentence. That is where freedom begins. You stop forcing, you start flowing. Someone says something unexpected. You do not panic, you become curious. Someone changes the topic, you move with them. Someone gives a short answer. You do not immediately think, "They do not like me." You simply change your approach. Someone goes quiet. You do not fight the silence, you give the moment room. This is what confidence looks like in real life. Not perfect speaking. Comfort with uncertainty. And you can train it. Start by removing one bad habit. Stop planning your reply while the other person is speaking. Many people do this without noticing. Someone begins talking and halfway through their sentence, your brain starts working. I know what I am going to say. Then you stop listening. You are only waiting for your turn. Sometimes you even interrupt because you are afraid you will forget your thought. But something important gets lost. You miss the ending. And very often, the ending is where the best detail appears. Someone says, "I wanted to study medicine when I was younger, but then my father got sick and everything changed." If you stopped listening at, "I wanted to study medicine," you might ask, "Why medicine?" But if you listened until the end, you heard the real door. Everything changed. That is where the emotion lives. That is where the story lives. Listen all the way. Let people finish. Your response can wait, and something surprising happens when you stop preparing every answer. Your responses become better. Why? Because now they are based on what the person actually said, not what you assumed they were going to say. That creates real connection. Another skill is learning to ask questions that come from genuine curiosity, not from duty. People can feel the difference. There is a huge difference between, "So, what do you do for fun?" and, "Wait, you said you build furniture yourself? How did you even get into that?" One sounds like you needed another question. The other sounds like you actually want the answer. Curiosity has energy. And energy is contagious. When you genuinely want to know something, your voice changes. Your face changes. The other person feels it. That is why you should not ask questions just because they are good conversation questions. Ask because something caught your attention. Maybe a person says, "I lived on a boat for 6 months." You do not need a list of clever questions. Your natural reaction might be, "6 months? How did that even happen?" Perfect, simple, real. Let your natural curiosity work for you. You already know how to do this when you feel comfortable. Think about talking to a close friend. Do you sit there thinking, "What is my next conversation technique?" No, you react, you laugh, you question, you interrupt sometimes, you tell stories, you remember things, you say, "Wait, what?" You say, "You never told me that." You say, "Okay, now I need the full story." That is natural conversation. Your goal is not to become a different person with strangers. Your goal is to bring more of that natural energy into new conversations. Of course, you may still feel nervous. That is normal. But nervousness does not have to control your behavior. You can feel nervous and still listen. You can feel nervous and still smile. You can feel nervous and still ask one simple question. You do not need to wait until you feel completely confident. Confidence often comes after you begin. Imagine standing at an event where you know almost nobody. Your brain says, "Do not go over there. You will not know what to say." But instead of trying to prepare a full conversation, give yourself one small goal. Start one moment. You walk over, you say, "How do you know the host?" That is it. You are not responsible for the next 15 minutes yet, only the first moment. They answer, "We used to work together." Now you have new information. You respond to that. One moment becomes another, then another. This way of thinking removes pressure. Do not try to carry the whole conversation before it begins. Carry only the moment you are in. That is one of the strongest rules you can remember. You only need the next step, not the whole road. and if the other person is not giving much, do not automatically blame yourself. Conversation requires two people. Sometimes you ask, "What brought you here?" They say, "A friend." You ask, "Have you known them long?" They say, "Yeah." You add, "I barely knew anyone when I came in, so I am doing the brave thing and pretending I belong here." They smile, but still give very little. At some point, accept the signal. You do not need to fight for a conversation that the other person does not want to build. You can politely move on. This is important because people who fear awkwardness often work too hard. They believe, if this conversation dies, I failed. No. Sometimes the conversation simply has no energy, and mature social confidence means knowing the difference between "I should try another direction" and "this moment is finished." Do not chase. Do not force. Connection works better when it is mutual. There is another habit that can make you much stronger socially. Learn to make observations. Questions are not the only way to begin or continue a conversation. You can comment on what is happening. This place became crowded fast. That is the biggest cup of coffee I have ever seen. Everyone looked confident until they announced the group activity. Observations feel natural because both people are experiencing the same environment. You are talking about something that already exists between you. That reduces pressure. Then the other person reacts. Maybe they agree. Maybe they joke. Maybe they tell you something. Now the conversation has started without an interview. This also works when you already know someone. Instead of always asking, "How are you?" you can say, "You look unusually happy today." Or, "You seem tired, long morning." Or, "You are very quiet today." Not as an accusation, just as an observation. People often respond more naturally to something specific than to a question they hear every day. "How are you?" "Fine." Conversation over. "You look like something good happened." They may smile. Actually, something did. Now you have something real. Another powerful skill is learning to offer small opinions. You do not need extreme opinions, just show that you have a point of view. Someone says, "I love rainy days." Instead of only asking, "Why?" you might say, "I like them when I have nowhere to go." The moment I have plans, rain becomes my enemy. Now they have something to react to. They may laugh, agree, disagree, tell a story. Opinions create texture. If you never give opinions, you can become pleasant but hard to know. People may think, "They were nice, but they learned almost nothing about you." Connection requires some visibility. Let people see small pieces of you, what you enjoy, what you dislike, what you find funny, what surprises you, what you care about. Not all at once, little by little. That makes you feel real. And real people are easier to connect with than perfect people. There is also power in saying things that are simple but honest. "I have never thought about it that way. I actually disagree. That would make me nervous. I would love that. I do not know much about this, but it sounds interesting." These sentences are not impressive, but they are authentic. And authenticity makes conversation easier because you are no longer inventing a character. You are responding as yourself. The less you perform, the more mental space you have to listen, and the more you listen, the easier it becomes to know what to say. That is the hidden cycle. Performance creates pressure. Pressure creates overthinking. Overthinking destroys listening. Poor listening makes your mind feel empty. Then you think, "I am bad at conversation." But the real problem began much earlier. You were trying too hard to manage how you looked, so try something different. In your next conversation, forget about looking impressive. Ask yourself, "Can I make this moment easy?" That is a better goal. Can I smile? Can I listen? Can I react naturally? Can I notice one detail? Can I add one small piece of myself? Can I give the other person room? That is enough. People usually enjoy conversations that feel easy, not conversations that feel perfect. And once you understand that, you stop needing endless techniques. You begin using the same few skills in different ways. Listen, notice, react, share, return, pause, follow. That is the entire game, and the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. At first you may consciously think, "Remember the detail." Later, you simply remember. At first you think, "Do not ask another question yet." Later, you naturally share something before asking. At first you think, "Do not panic during silence." Later, silence does not bother you. Skills become habits. Habits become personality. And one day, you may notice something strange. You walk away from a conversation and realize, you never once worried about what to say next. Not because you had a script, not because every sentence was brilliant, but because you were too busy being present to be afraid. That is the level you are aiming for. Not endless words, not perfect confidence, not becoming the loudest person in every room. Just this, the ability to stay connected to the moment. Because when you can do that, almost anyone can become interesting, almost any topic can open. Almost any ordinary sentence can become a story. And even silence stops feeling like the enemy. You stop thinking of conversation as something you must perform. You begin seeing it for what it really is, two people discovering what happens next. And when you are comfortable with not knowing what happens next, you become much harder to shake. You can talk to the confident person, the quiet person, the stranger, the older person, the successful person, the person you admire. You do not need a different script for each one. You bring the same thing every time: attention, curiosity, calmness, and enough courage to begin. That is what makes a great conversationalist, not someone who always has something to say, but someone who knows how to find something worth saying inside the conversation itself. And once that becomes natural, you will no longer enter conversations thinking, "I hope I do not run out of things to say." You will enter thinking, "Let us see where this goes." That single shift can change the way you talk to people for the rest of your life. You do not become a great conversationalist by learning more words. You become one by learning how to notice more. One detail, one emotion, one unfinished thought. That is often all you need. So the next time your mind goes blank, do not panic and search for a new topic. Go back to what they just said. The conversation is usually already giving you your next move. Listen better, react honestly, share something real, and stop trying to perform. Because people may forget your cleverest sentence, but they will remember how easy it felt to talk to you. If this video gave you something useful, comment Fluent below, subscribe, and remember, the best conversationalists are not the people who always know what to say. They are the people who make others want to keep talking.